New York Game Day continues here on 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app. Jake Asman with you. Mike Tannenbaum joins the show starting at 9 a.m. as we take you till noon here in week number 9 of the NFL season. You just heard there from Aaron Glenn coming off his first win as a head coach. He was asked how the Jets will approach the trade deadline, which is this Tuesday at 4 p.m. And look, clock is ticking. However, barring an offer that the Jets simply can't refuse, I don't believe the New York Jets are going to make this monster deal that includes trading away running back Breece Hall or all-pro defensive tackle Quinnen Williams. I just don't see it. I know the Jets are 1-7, but if you look at their season, they're not a typical 1-7 roster. And there's players on this team that you don't just give away. Now, if a team's willing to offer you a second-round pick or even a third-round pick for Breece Hall, who's on the final year of his deal, at a position that, let's be real, is not thought of the way it once was, sure, we can have that conversation. But is that offer out there? I don't think it is. And I think if you're the Jets and you're Aaron Glenn and you're trying to win football games, you're trying to establish your culture, can you really do that if you trade away Breece Hall? What is your offense going to look like? Just Garrett Wilson and nobody else? Can you really trade away even Quinnen Williams, who's under contract beyond this year? You have to rework it in all likelihood. There's only $5 million of that current contract guaranteed after this year, and Q's going to want more money. But what are you getting from Quinnen Williams? You getting a first-round pick at the deadline for him now? I don't think so. Quinnen is still a very good player. He hasn't had the greatest year, though. You're not selling high right now. He's got one sack. You get first-round picks for guys that sack the quarterback. In the offseason, could you get a one for Q? Maybe. But I don't see the Jets having this big fire sale, and I don't think they should either. I think the New York Jets should be looking to keep a guy like Breece Hall, not trade him. Breece Hall is a really good football player who's 24 years old, and we all know the Jets are going to be taking a quarterback. We don't necessarily know where. Could be at pick number 1, could be at pick 2. Maybe they actually win some games here over the next 9 weeks and they're not picking in the top 3. But there's going to be guys that go in the first round this year. Certainly more than 1, 2, 3. They'll be quarterbacks, and the Jets are going to be in position to take one of them. I want that young quarterback to have every possible opportunity to succeed. And Breece Hall, to me, is a guy that can help you no matter who your quarterback is. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. As a runner, or as a receiver, or as we saw against the Cincinnati Bengals, even as a thrower, a quarterback, throwing the game-winning touchdown to Mason Taylor. I do not want to trade Breece Hall. I want to keep him. Now, the franchise tag is an option for the Jets with Breece, although that might be close to $15, $16 million a year, as it's the average of the 5 highest paid players at that position. But if you go to Breece Hall and you say, look, do you want to be here? And he says he does, I'd offer Breece Hall a similar contract to what James Cook got with the Bills or Kyron Williams got with the Rams. You could pay Breece Hall around $11, $12 million per year over the next 2 years. Let's say it's a 3-year deal. 2 of it is guaranteed. You buy out his 2 franchise tag years, and you keep a guy who's a damn good football player around. You're not paying a lot of money for your quarterback. Justin Fields is one of the lower paid starters in the league. It was a front-loaded deal anyway. There's only $10 million guaranteed on it for next year. The Rodgers dead cap hit that the Jets will incur of $35 million is off your books after 2026. You'll have a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal. You have the money to keep Breece Hall. I would keep him. He's a good football player. The Jets do not have enough good football players. They hit on Breece Hall. The idea that you could flip him for, let's say, a 4th-round pick and find another Breece Hall, come on. The Jets reportedly want at least a 3rd-round pick for Breece Hall. And you know what? Even then, I don't know if it's a lock I'm trading him. Now, if the Jets already have determined there's no way I'm keeping Breece Hall, we're getting rid of him, then, okay, if I get a 3rd, I have to do it so I don't lose him for nothing. But why would they make that determination? Because they need good players, especially on that side of the ball. Don't make the mistake you made with Sam Darnold all over again, where you actually picked the right quarterback, but we didn't know for several years because you put him in a position where he didn't have enough good players around him and certainly didn't have the right coaching. And there's certainly a major TBD with this coaching staff, Aaron Glenn, Tanner Engstrand, the play caller, all that. But at least give your young quarterback a legitimate running back. And then you also will have Braylon Allen coming back from his injury next year. Isaiah Davis at over 100 yards from scrimmage in the Jets win this last Sunday. Like, that is not nothing in that room. Keep that room together. Plus, your offensive line is the bookend tackles. Membu and Fashanu. Tippmann is a legit guard in this league. I want to keep this team together because there's some pieces here that for any young quarterback, they'll be put in a situation where it's not the worst place to go if you're drafted by the Jets. And we have not been able to say that in the past. Don't make the Sam Darnold mistake. You could actually pick the right quarterback and we won't know because you didn't give that quarterback a fair opportunity to really learn and develop and have a shot. I'd keep Breece Hall. And unless someone's giving me a first-round pick for Quinnen Williams, this to me is an offseason conversation. Now, the one trade the Jets did make so far, they traded Michael Carter, their nickel, to the Philadelphia Eagles, where he gets reunited with Joe Douglas, who drafted him in 2021. Michael Carter was a really good football player for the Jets. Unfortunately, he became expendable because the last 2 seasons now, he's been banged up, has not been the same player. He has not lived up to that 3-year, $31 million extension he signed 14 months ago. And the Jets, to their credit, give Darren Muji, their GM, credit for this move. They acquired nickelback Jarvis Brownlee Jr. from Tennessee, and he's been really good so far. So you knew Michael Carter was not going to be on the Jets beyond this season. They were going to cut him and save money on their cap. Now, you save even more money. You clear $16 million in cap space for 2026 and 2027, and you got back a guy in John Mechie, who once upon a time was a second-round pick by the Houston Texans at the wide receiver spot, really has not had an opportunity to truly play in crowded rooms in Houston, certainly a crowded room in Philadelphia. With the Jets, it's not a crowded room. So it's a lottery ticket on a guy that has some talent. Maybe you find another diamond in the rough, but if not, you got out of the Carter contract and you already had his replacement on the team because Brownlee's been really good since given the opportunity to start playing in Michael Carter's spot in the lineup. So I have no issue with that. You know, if the Jets want to trade away Alan Lazard for a bag of used footballs, I'll drive him to the airport myself. They want to trade away Michael Clemens. Albert Breer and SI wrote that teams have called the Jets about Clemens, which is astonishing, but that's apparently true. Then fine, you could trade Michael Clemens. But from a Jet standpoint, I'm not trading Breece and I'm not trading Quinnen Williams. I think those guys are good football players that I want here for the long haul. If you get offered a 1 for Quinnen, fine. I don't think that's happening now. I'm certainly not trading Jermaine Johnson, who's under contract for another year. And it's not a coincidence that the Jet defense has played better overall the last 3 games since he's returned back from his injury. Will McDonald's a pass rusher. I'm not trading him unless I'm getting a legit offer. Rich Cimini wrote the Jets can maybe get a 3rd or a 4th for McDonald. No, thank you. Because then you got to replace these guys. And we all love the idea of draft picks, but when you actually have to use those draft picks on players, then what? Are you going to hit on those picks? I'm not necessarily convinced. So I think the Jets made a really smart trade this week with Michael Carter. But I'm not just giving away good football players, especially a guy in Breece Hall, who I do have the franchise tag as an option. And I would look to try and keep here beyond just this season because he can help you, man. You saw his value in that win over the Bengals on Sunday. 800-919-3776. We'll get to your calls on the other side. Mike Tannenbaum will join us, of course, at the top of next hour for the final 3 hours of our show. Plus, don't make an Asman of yourself is coming up. I got some bets I like in the Week 9 NFL slate. Keep it right here. It's New York Game Day, and you're listening to all of it on 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app. Just after 10 a.m. here on the first Sunday of November. Daylight saving time as well, so you get an extra hour to sleep in before all the games in the NFL Week 9 get underway at 1 o'clock. Mike T joining us live from Ford Field, where he's on the call today for the Vikings at the Lions. Mike, how we feeling? We've reached the 10 a.m. hour here on November 2nd.
Jake, I'm surprised that you're doing the show today. How come you're not doing the marathon?
Can I tell you, I have a major gripe with the marathon. I don't understand people that run for fun. I don't get it. I get no enjoyment out of running and seeing all these people run and the people that make the signs and support other people running. It rubs me the wrong way. I got to be honest with you.
Jake, you seem like you're one of these people that's easily aggrieved. You know, whatever it may be. You know, the Jets win, but they win ugly. People run, but they run for fun. Are you an easily aggrieved person?
I am, but let me clean up one thing. I'm thrilled the Jets won. You could tell me the Jets could win 3-2 somehow. I'm just thrilled they won a game, Mike. I really am. I mean, they need – because could you imagine the conversation we would be having on this show? And I talk about the Jets on my day job on YouTube 4 hours a day. I did not want to take calls from angry Jet fans about, 0-17 and one and dunning, the coaching staff and GM. Like, I know it's only one win, but – God, did the Jets need that win to go into the bye feeling a lot better, even if it's just that one win temporarily about where they're at.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And look, there's a lot of things to clean up and get better, but it's always easier to do that after a win. And you just, you go back to that World Series game last night, and, that principle really applies to the Jets. You go back to the Steeler game. If there was 2 or 3 plays in that game that went differently, the Jets won on opening day. And again, I'm not saying they're in playoff contention if they had won that game, but I think how the season was viewed or like the trajectory of Aaron Glenn, I think would have been viewed differently maybe had they won that first game, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other games subsequently.
For sure. I mean, they had the lead late in Tampa. The defense could have gotten a stop. They could have stole that. I mean, Carolina, I was at that game. I mean, it was a game where they didn't score an offensive touchdown. That game was certainly winnable. The London game, you and I were on the air for the first 3 quarters of that. If they maybe made a quarterback change at halftime, do they win that? So there's a lot of what-ifs, and we certainly could talk about the state of this team. Plus, we mentioned the trade deadline. That's coming up on Tuesday. We will get into that. But this story broke publicly at the end of our show last Sunday. You tipped us off that you had heard word about Nick Mangold passing before we got on the air. So we had to do the whole show last week for the most part, sitting on that. Now that we've had an opportunity for a week to go by, and I know you mentioned it earlier, Mike, you'll be at Nick's funeral on Tuesday. Can you give us your thoughts reflecting on Nick Mangold, a player you knew as well as anyone, and you were a big reason why he was a Jet in the first place, drafting him in 2006?
Yeah, earlier we had talked about Dexter Lawrence, Jake, and how there are certain players that they contribute, but they don't show up in the stat sheet. And I think Nick's one of those people because if you talk to the Damian Woodies of the world, the Alan Fanecas of the world, the Brickashaw, I think what they would tell you is that when we had success, with the Jets in 09 and 10, most notably, Nick was really the quarterback of the run game. Nick was the quarterback of the protections. He was immensely valuable as a player and even more so as a person and a teammate. Nick was a guy that wasn't always what you see is what you get because he was very affable, easygoing externally, but he was tough and dependable. He always answered the bell, and I was a better person to be around him. And it's just unbelievable, Jake, that at 41 he's gone. It's really hard to comprehend. And like I said, this has been a really tough tragedy for a lot of people. I think if something good comes out of it, it was just all the people that you reconnect with, and you realize all the people that Nick influenced with his life.
Well said. And obviously thoughts are with his family and everyone who knew him during this very difficult time. I could speak to Nick, about Nick as someone who is a diehard fan of the Jets, and Nick Mangold was, of course, one of my favorite players, and just his impact that he had, on the fan base. He was a Jet through and through. There's very few players that played their entire career with the Jets and are as beloved as Mangold was. And you think of the other players during that time, Mike, during that era you oversaw the team, as great as Darrelle Revis was, and I was in Canton to watch him go into the Hall of Fame. He had a stint with Tampa. He wins a ring, of course, with the Patriots. Nick Mangold was a Jet. He wanted to retire as a Jet. He still was around the organization after retiring, working for the team in media, and there was videos of him at training camp last year coaching up Joe Tipman, who was the Jet center and still is a part of that offensive line. Just this guy was a Jet through and through, and to see his life cut short at age 41, it's just devastating. And I believe he was a Hall of Fame player, and I'm hoping that in a couple years, maybe as early as this year, as once again he's on the short list of the modern era semifinalists for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I hope he's there and I get a chance to watch that induction and his family gets that moment because, to me, Mike, he's a Hall of Fame player that you drafted, and I think every Jet fan out there who watched him would agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm incredibly biased, but absolutely, a Hall of Famer is, stands for greatness, consistency, the impact on the game, teammates. Like, to me, he checks every box. So, that day will come for that debate. But, more importantly, you think about, 4 young kids, Jake. It's just amazing. Like, he had this vibrant career for, a long time. And at 41, he still had his whole life in front of him. That's the part that, you just feel terrible, and I could, as a dad, just think about those kids and, his wife. And, he stayed in the area, in the New Jersey area that was home for him. His roots were there. And, it's just too bad that he won't be able to, enjoy the next, several phases of his life.
Absolutely. Now, I want to play you some sound from the New Heights podcast, of course. That's Travis Kelce and I believe another future Hall of Fame center, Jason Kelce, who was a 6-time first-team All-Pro with the Eagles. This was Jason Kelce talking about Nick Mangold.
Obviously, it's been talked about Nick Mangold passing. He's been struggling with the genetic disorder and needed a new kidney. And you want to talk about one of the stalwart, best offensive linemen to ever play the game.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people come up and tell me, you're the best center to ever play. I get that from other people. And it's hard to receive that because I know in my heart that Nick Mangold at his best was 10 times a player than I ever was. I could never be that dominant at the center position. Nick was phenomenal. He was unbelievable in pass protection. He was an unbelievably smart leader and getting those guys on the same page. And he would murder people in the run game. He was unbelievable when he was in the NFL. He was unbelievable at Ohio State.
Yeah, he was.
It's just a travesty that's happened at such a young age. He's got a whole family. When you think about offensive linemen over the past 2 decades, the best of the best, you don't look any further than Nick Mangold.
It's well said there by Jason Kelce. And, Mike, that is quite the compliment coming from one of the most accomplished centers over the last, 30-plus years in the NFL. I mentioned it, 6-time first-team All-Pro. Jason Kelce was with the Eagles, and he just said there that Nick Mangold at his best was 10 times the player than I ever was. So, obviously, we're all thinking about Nick Mangold and his family, and I hope they do get that day to see Nick be honored with an induction into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that was really classy of Jason Kelce, who was also an incredibly good player. Jason to me was a little bit more of the Kevin Mawai type, somebody that could get out on the perimeter, great athlete. I think what made Nick so special, and I think this is a little bit what Jason was alluding to, Nick was a big, thick guy who also was a good athlete, but he could I think Nick had a little bit more of the combination of power and agility where, Jason again was an incredible player, but a little bit again in the mold of Kevin Mawai. Kevin was such a good complement to Curtis Martin because of the outside zones and sort of the screens, the draws, getting out in space. But, Nick to me was just, probably at another level because of his physicality.
Think about what the Jets went through when you were there, Mike. Kevin Mawai to Nick Mangold, 19 years of elite play at the center position. I mean, for all the issues the Jets have had at quarterback, right, we could spot bad quarterback play if you're a Jet fan. We also could spot what great center play looks like, and that's what that gold standard was for all those years, going from Hall of Famer Kevin Mawai to another guy that I think you and I both believe should be in the Hall of Fame someday in Nick Mangold.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's well said. And that, a lot of people feel like when you build a baseball team, you want to be strong down the middle, catcher, shortstop, center field, obviously pitching. Same goes true for building a football team. You want to be strong down the middle, closer to the ball. Starts with the center and quarterback position. So, we were really lucky to go from Kevin to Nick. There were a lot of other great players on that line. Brandon Moore in particular, I thought was a very underrated, very good right guard. And then obviously we had, the bookend tackles, DeBerkshire Ferguson, and Damian Woody, and that was the backbone of a lot of really good teams.
No doubt, and you were a big part of putting those teams together, Mike. So I think every Jet fan will forever be grateful for that. He's Mike Tannenbaum. My name is Jake Asman. It's New York Game Day right here. It's 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app. We'll talk more about the Jets on the other side. They finally have a win. They are now part of every other team in the league with a win. They're in their bye. So what happens after the bye? Trade deadline's Tuesday. Will the Jets make any other more significant moves from now until then? We'll get Mike's thoughts on that and much more. Keep it right here. Rich Cimini will join us at 10:30 in his weekly spot to talk about the latest with the Jets. A lot still to do. It's New York Game Day, and you're listening to all of it on 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app. Jets get their first win of the season last week. And, Mike, I certainly have been very critical of Aaron Glenn and Justin Fields, but I give both those guys so much credit. One, to the coach for how he kept the team together despite everything going on with the comments from the owner and the Jets record and the rumors of guys being traded and the bye being this week. It would have been very easy for the Jets, who trailed in this game 10-0 and 17-3, to completely check out. They did not. They found a way to win. And then just so much credit to Justin Fields, because despite however you feel about him as a quarterback, I thought the way he handled everything this past week was just unbelievable. And for him to play the game he did, that was so cool to see. We'll see if it lasts and all that, but for at least a day, I think if you're a Jet fan, on a day we lost the great Nick Mangold, it was just unbelievable to see the Jets get their first win last week.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, hopefully that's something they could build on here in the second half of the season. There were a lot of positives that came out of that win.
The offensive line, Mike, played by far and away their best game of the year, and I thought, symbolically, what a tribute to Nick Mangold for the Jets' offensive line to look that good protecting Justin Fields.
Yeah, and Nick was born about 45 minutes away from where that game was played, so there was a ton of irony. I saw one other thing that was really interesting. The quarterback numbers for the Jets in that game were 7 and 4, which was, of course, 74 for Nick Mangold.
That's an unbelievable, coincidence, of course, when things like that happen. As far as, this week coming up now for the Jets, you're the perfect guy to be discussing these things with, as someone who knows exactly what Darren Muji is going through, fielding calls around this time ahead of the deadline. We talked about the Michael Carter deal a little earlier on in the show. Your thoughts now on what the Jets potentially could do between now and Tuesday. A lot of talk, some reports out even this morning, teams continuing to call the Jets about their players, most notably running back Breece Hall and former All-Pro defensive tackle Quinnen Williams.
Yeah, look, there's a lot to unpack here. So, people are going to say, well, he's in the last year of his deal, keep him, and you get a compensatory pick. The compensatory pick formula is extraordinarily complicated. It's like 23 pages long, but basically it's the netting out process of players in, players out. So presumably they're going to be aggressive in year 2 in the free agent market. And I wouldn't bank that you're going to get a third-round pick in 2027 for Breece Hall if you sign a lot of players. So I think fundamentally, Jake, it starts with, is Breece Hall in your plans? If he is, I would try to get him signed. If I felt like his price was going to be exorbitant, I think that has to be a factor in potentially trading him.
In terms of Breece Hall, Mike, you look at the options the Jets have, right? You could extend him. You could use the franchise tag. Can you break down the thought process? If they were to use the tag, it's the average of the top 5 running backs, of course, their salaries, right? So that'd be, if math serves me correct, around 15 or 16 million. I don't know if Breece is necessarily worth that, but I also don't want to lose him for nothing. I want to keep him because regardless who the quarterback is next year, Breece Hall is a guy that could help you and give you a chance to win games, as we've seen. So I want to keep him. I'd love to extend him. Can you take us kind of inside what the Jets could be weighing with a contract extension versus, hey, using the tag if they choose to not trade him and don't want to lose him for nothing?
Yeah, I think one of the things is franchising a running back. I just don't know if that's a great use of your resources because the theory is you could find running backs. Now, look, he's a really, really good player, and you do want to keep him, Jake, but to pay him whatever that number is, $15, $16 million on a one-year deal, I don't know if that's the best use of resources. So, again, to me, the juxtaposition is, can we get him extended to a reasonable number? What is that number, 12-ish, give or take, or whatever it may be? But, hey, can we get him in, to a 3 to 4-year extension and then say, all right, look, we got whatever, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis around him, maybe add another back at some point. I just don't know if you want to franchise a running back on a one-year deal.
if they choose to extend him, you had mentioned last week, hey, I'd be talking about, and this is before he had a big game, I'd be talking about trying to get something done during the bye week. Do you think those conversations have happened? Do you think the Jets have approached Breece Hall just to gauge if he does want to stick around and be a part of this?
Yeah, I don't know, but here's what I can tell you, Jake. It's interesting. If you got 53 guys on your roster, half will say, hey, speak to my agent. And the other half will be like, look, I don't want to be distracted. Let's deal with this after the season. And, obviously from a GM's perspective, you have to be very respectful of that. So and I don't know what camp Breece Hall falls into. But I want to have all the information if I'm the Jets, because that's going to really be a big factor relative to, am I trading him or not? Because, again, is it the end of the world for him to graduate in March of 2026? No, because you will get, in all likelihood, a compensatory. But if you go out and sign 3 or 4 players to big contracts, Jake, that compensatory pick may not be what you think it is.
Yeah, and the Jets have $75 million roughly projected cap space, so most anticipate them being spenders and trying to add to this team, which will be the second year for this regime. Reportedly, the Jets are asking for at least a third-round pick for Breece. Do you think any team would be willing to trade that for a guy who is, of course, a running back and is a guy that will be a free agent at the end of the season?
Yeah, well, I think the inverse of like what we just talked about, which is like if we're going to acquire, Breece Hall, give up a third-round pick, I want to talk to his agent, and under the rules, you can bring in a player in contemplation of a trade and or talk to his agent. So if we're going to be, fill in the blank, the Kansas City Chiefs, and we're giving up a third-round pick, I want to make sure that we can extend him at least for a couple of years, because you don't want to give up that sort of value in terms of like draft choice compensation without, not having him under, contract, because if you're not giving up a third-round pick for 8 games or whatever it is.
Then there's Quinnen Williams. My team's apparently continuing to call the Jets about Quinnen. He still has years left on his deal, however, only $5 million guaranteed, so there's a thought that he's going to go to the Jets and want to get his deal reworked. He's the longest tenured Jet on the team. He was drafted 3rd overall in 2019. He's in year 7. All he has known has been, losing and not having any success. So I don't think anyone could blame him if he's unhappy. And here are the Jets again at 1-7. But your thoughts on Quinnen? Me personally, as a Jet fan, I wouldn't trade this guy unless I'm getting a first-round pick. I don't think the Jets are doing themselves a favor if they get rid of Quinnen. You got to replace Quinnen Williams, and to me, he's still a damn good football player. He's only 27 too.
Yeah, no, I heard you in the 8 o'clock hour, which, some people were prepping for the marathon. You were prepping to do the show by yourself. Look, I agree. Like, the object of the exercise is to collect and retain good players. So here's a player that's in his prime. We could quibble. Is he a B plus, A minus? And I think, could he be a little bit more productive at times? Of course he can. But I'm with you, generally speaking. I think he's a really good player. I would keep him. I would have to have my socks knocked off to move on, because, you put it really well, Jake, which is if you trade Quinnen Williams and you get a low first-round pick, you're hoping to replace him with a player like Quinnen Williams.
And to me, Mike, when I look at this Jets team, I don't think they're a 1-7 roster. That's been my frustration with the team this year. I think their talent is a lot better than what the record would indicate. And hopefully over these next 9 games, they start to win games and they build on it, so you feel a lot better about this team going forward. If you start tearing it all down, you got to replace these guys. And draft picks are there's no guarantee. I think fans love the idea of, I'll get picks for these guys. You have to actually hit on these picks. And, to me, if you want to consider trading Quinnen Williams, why wouldn't you just wait till the offseason and see if more teams are involved? You can get a better deal. Like, I don't think you're going to get his value, what he's actually worth, if you were to do it between now and Tuesday.
Yeah, I think there's one other variable to talk about here, which I think is going to be a fascinating offseason discussion, which is this. Let's say, again, we don't know how this is going to play out here, but just hang here with me for a second. Tennessee gets the first pick in the draft, because you could talk about teams like the New Orleans Saints, the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, the Jets will be in this conversation. Teams that could be, at the top of the draft. And it's reasonable to think that could the Dolphins draft a quarterback? Absolutely. Is it reasonable to think the Jets could draft a quarterback? Absolutely. Same goes for the Saints, right? And maybe a team like Arizona falls apart, whatever it may be. I think the team that's going to be in that conversation that isn't is the Tennessee Titans, who just drafted Cam Ward. So let's say you fall in love with, Ty Simpson of Alabama, Fernando Mendoza of Indiana, and you want to trade up to get him, having an extra pick may make the difference between your package getting to the first pick versus one of those other teams.
That to me is a big part of all this. And by the way, throw the Browns in that conversation too, right? At 2-6, and that's a huge game for the Jets coming out of the bye. We'll talk more about it next week. But just to give you a little feel for where I'm at, Mike, the Jets over the last 9 years, you want to guess what their record is? The game following their bye week?
They're undefeated.
They're almost defeated. They're 1-8 following the bye. So I think if Aaron Glenn wants to, continue to prove that he's getting better and this team is turning the corner and that we're starting to see some real improvement for this regime, I think a win after the bye week against a 2-6 Browns team when the Jets are home and they're a slight favorite already in that game will go a long way. But we will talk more about that next week. 2 days, 5 hours, 31 minutes, and 27 seconds from now is the NFL trade deadline. Coming up, we'll talk with Rich Cimini. He's got some reports out on the Jets at the deadline, what he's hearing, and we'll get Rich's thoughts, of course, on the late, great Nick Mangold in Rich's weekly segment with us here on the show. He's Mike Tannenbaum. My name is Jake Asman. You're listening to New York Game Day as we're with you till noon right here on 880 ESPN New York and the ESPN New York app. Time right now for the Rich Cimini report as we talk all things New York Jets following the Jets' first win of the season against the Bengals this past Sunday. Jets off today, part of their bye week. They return next week against the Browns, and before they play again, the NFL trade deadline will have passed. And for more on all that, we say hello to Rich, who's nice enough to join us on the show. Rich, Jake, and Mike, hope you're doing well during the bye week.
Good morning, gentlemen. Yes, and try to enjoy this bye weekend as much as possible because it's going to get pretty busy over the next 48 hours.
You're not running in the New York City Marathon, Rich?
No, I am not. No, not my speed. Could not even make a mile, I don't think.
A lot to talk about with you, of course. I want to start, though, with some news that became official at the end of our show last week. And, I listened to your podcast, and you had a great sit-down with Damian Woody talking about the career and the legacy of Nick Mangold. In your experience, Rich, covering the Jets, give us some thoughts on what it was like to cover Nick and maybe a favorite memory that you could share during your experience getting to know him and being around him.
Well, everyone knows how good a player he was. But he was really the kind of guy in the locker room who was always kept things light. I don't think he took himself too seriously. He was always the guy. And as we're talking, I can visualize where his locker is in the Jet locker room at Florham Park, and him like on a Friday wearing a long green robe. He called it his spa day, and it was the day at the end of the practice week he would go get a massage, and he just always joking, like really had a lighthearted sense of humor. And that became, and Mike might remember this, it was 2008. It was one of Brett Favre's first practices, and they had Eric Mangini, who was a pretty disciplined coach. If you made a mistake in practice, you had to run a penalty lap. So Favre and Mangold obviously were not used to each other. They just met, and they bobbled a snap exchange, and they had to run a penalty lap. And so I think there were a few thousand people there at Hofstra that day. And here you have this future Hall of Famer and Favre, jogging around the field, and Nick Mangold basically jogging shotgun, and the crowd rose. It was just this loud ovation, and I asked Nick about it afterwards, and he thought it was hilarious because he was actually getting applauded for making a mistake, which he thought was so crazy. And he just had a very self-deprecating sense of humor. He will be missed. I would easily say he's one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved Jet over the last 20 to 25 years.
Yeah, Rich, that's really well said. I always said, Nick was not a what you see is what you get guy because he was so affable and so, as you mentioned, lighthearted, yet he was like a world-class competitor. How about what you saw for him as a player for all those years? What stood out to you about that, Rich?
Just and I think Damian Woody said this best. He called him the brains of the outfit. I forgot who drafted him. It was a really good draft pick. I guess you're glad you didn't take Joseph Adai right there, right, Mike? I guess that was one player who was hanging around the board there at that particular spot. Obviously, that you made the right decision, and I just think the other guys around him, like Damian Woody, saying that Mangold was one of the reasons why he wanted to come to the Jets, and just being surrounded by a Hall of Famer like Alan Faneca and DeBrickashaw Ferguson and Brandon Moore, that was the best offensive line I've ever covered. And when you talk to those guys, they all look to Nick. because he was the guy who called the signals. I think he had an enormous impact on Mark Sanchez, who, let's face it, was very inexperienced and very turnover prone his first season. And Nick, even though it was only his third year, he was like the grizzled veteran and called the protections, the blocking schemes, took a lot off Mark's plate, and I think eased Sanchez's transition into the NFL.
Mike Tannenbaum, of course, the great GM that drafted Nick Mangold. He's part of New York Game Day alongside me, Jake Asman. Rich Cimini is joining us here in his weekly segment as we talk all things New York Jets. One final point on Mangold, Rich, because I was reading your story about his, possibility of getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's one of the 52 modern era semifinalists to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame for the upcoming class. Your thoughts on his candidacy? Do you think ultimately, when it's all said and done, Nick Mangold will join, Kevin Mawae, another great Jet center, in the Hall of Fame?
Well, we're going to find out a lot over the next 2 weeks because I'm on that selection committee, and we're going to have a vote on those modern era candidates any day now. And so we have a 2-week window to vote, and they're going to cut that in half. I was just poring over the list the last couple of days, doing a lot of intensive research. I mean, it's a really good group of players. The competition is so fierce. And even at his own position, Marquise Pouncey from the Steelers, had a great career. Olin Kreutz from the Bears had a great career, and Nick had a great career. And that's just at the center position alone. So I definitely think he's worthy of consideration, strong consideration. I'd say he's probably a long shot this year simply because sometimes it takes a few years to work your way through the process. Kevin Mawae didn't get in his first year. I think he was a semifinalist and a finalist, 4 different times before he finally broke through. So it's a really difficult, because they're only letting in 5 modern era guys a year, sometimes even less. And so, I think someday he has a really good chance, but I think this year in particular, it's just so loaded with so many great players.
And then, Rich, how about just switching gears here to Tuesday? What are your expectations around the trade deadline? Buyers, sellers, any players we should keep an eye on?
Well, I mean, the Jets, of course, made one trade already, sending Michael Carter out and bringing in John Mechie, the wide receiver, with swapping a couple of late draft picks as well. I thought it was a good trade for the Jets. Obviously, Carter had become expendable with, Brownlee's emergence, and that's basically a salary dump there. They're going to save a lot of cap room over the next couple of years. But in terms of what might happen before Tuesday, I think, the big name is out there is Breece Hall. From what I've been told, and I reported this morning, in the last couple of days, unless they just get blown away by an offer, I'm talking like a day 2 draft pick, I don't think Breece Hall will go anywhere. I think you could put Will McDonald into that group and Quinnen Williams in that group as well. It would just take a Godfather-type offer. The 2 players I think to watch, they're getting a lot of calls on Jermaine Johnson. Even though Jermaine claims the Jets front office told him that he's not going anywhere, that hasn't stopped teams from calling. I'd be very surprised if they traded him. Again, that's going to take a really high draft pick, like a day, maybe even a late 1, early 2 the Jets are looking for. And the guy I think is, if you're asking most likely to be traded, even though I still think it's probably not likely, is Quincy Williams. He's in the last year of his contract. I do not believe he is in the Jets' long-term plans. They've already invested a lot of money at that position with Jamie and Sherwood. I'd be very surprised if they wanted to sign another $15 million a year linebacker. So Quincy Williams, although they're not going to get back much in return for a linebacker, in the last year of his contract, they probably would get a 6 or a 7 back. So in the end, I think he'll probably end up staying. But if there were a guy to go, I think Quincy Williams would be the name to watch. Also, wouldn't rule out them bringing in a guy in a trade. Always looking for offensive linemen, and obviously safety is a big need now with Andre Cisco out for the year.
Rich Cimini is our guest here on New York Game Day, ESPN Jets reporter, host of the Flight Deck podcast. Rich, as far as the game last Sunday, right, Aaron Glenn getting his first win as the Jet coach, do you think what the Jets did in that game, is there anything that is sustainable now going forward? Can we see real improvement following the bye over these next 9 games the Jets still have to go?
Well, I mean, confidence. I mean, sometimes no matter how much the coach preaches, how they want to play and what their DNA is and what our brand is, to use an Aaron Glennism, You need to see it. You need to validate it with actual results on the field, and they did that, specifically the running game. What was it, 250 yards, over 500 yards offense. All that is good. I mean, that's the offense they want to be. Now, all that being said, they went against one of the worst defenses in the league in Cincinnati. Let's not lose sight of that. And also Trey Hendrickson was out. I think it'll be good for the offensive line. They pitched pretty much a perfect game. I mean, they didn't allow a sack and they ran for 250. You can't get much better than that if you're an offensive line. So all of those things creates a good vibe around the building. The NFL is such a week-to-week business, as Mike knows. Pat Riley, I think it was Pat Riley who said it's either misery or euphoria, and so the Jets are enjoying a little euphoria. Defense has some things to clean up. They obviously give up 38 points in that game, and there's some things they need to tweak during the bye week.
Rich, along those lines, what do you think, Justin Fields, I assume, is he the guy moving forward with that performance last week, or how do you think that sorts out for the second half?
Yeah, I mean, how can you bench him coming off a game like that? I mean, he just gave you your first. Now, the ironic thing is here is, had Tyrod Taylor been healthier, I think Tyrod would have started in Cincinnati. I think Aaron Glenn was leaning that way early in the week, and then as they kept practicing, Tyrod's knee, we're calling it a bone bruise, just flared up, and he didn't feel comfortable, and they eventually ruled him out. So that's the crazy part about it, is that if his knee is okay, he probably starts that game. But now what Justin Fields played his best game as a Jet. To me, it's a no-brainer. You keep starting him. That's really what the second half of the year is about. I think we know the answer on Justin Fields in terms of long-term, but you want to exhaust as much as you can in terms of playing time. Let him play it out, see what comes of it. And I also think Tyrod Taylor's knee is a factor as well. The Jets quietly worked out a couple of free agent quarterbacks this past week, Desmond Ridder and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I think possibly as a contingency, just in case something happens with Tyrod's knee. So that's something to bears watching as well.
Rich, really appreciate your time. Enjoy a Sunday without Jets football, and we'll talk with you next week.
All right, looking forward to it, guys. Have a good one.